Several U.S. states were essentially sovereign nations before they became part of the United States. You could say that really of the original 13 colonies before Confederation. Vermont, California, and Texas were all independent states before joining the Union, and the Kingdom of Hawaii was an independent kingdom for nearly a century before American interests overthrew the monarchy. But one of the least known of these was the short-lived Republic of Florida. When the American War for Independence ended in 1783, Spain regained control of territory it had lost to Britain in the Seven Years' War 20 years earlier. All of Spanish Florida, which had then included the entire Gulf Coast of the Mississippi River. As allies to the United States during the war, it might seem that the two nations would remain friendly, but the Spanish territory was almost immediately embroiled in a border dispute. The dispute had its origins in two conflicting claims. Since its establishment in 1732, the colony of Georgia's borders had shifted considerably. It was after the Seven Years' War that Georgia established the modern border with Florida, and Georgia claimed territory west from those boundaries to the Mississippi River. The Treaty of Paris, which ended the Revolutionary War, had established the United States southern border at the 31-degree latitude, which allowed Georgia to claim almost all of the land that now makes up Alabama and Mississippi. The other issue was the uncertain boundaries of West Florida. After taking the land from the French and Spanish, the British had split the territory into two separate colonies: West Florida, with its capital at Pensacola, and East Florida, governed from St. Augustine. In the 1760s, boundaries of West Florida, originally set at the 31-degree line, had been shifted north to 32 degrees, 28 minutes north. The territory was expanded in part because settlers in the region would be much closer to the capital at Pensacola than they were to Savannah. West Florida is one of only a few territories that were administered by France, Spain, and England at different times. The Spanish insisted that they'd been given the territory of West Florida, which included the land north of 31 degrees, while the Americans argued that the territory had always been British and never in the hands of the Spanish, and so was rightfully American. The Spanish controlled the key port at New Orleans, which had been given to them by France in 1762 in the secret Treaty of Fontainebleau, and in 1784 they closed the port to American goods coming south down the river, effectively denying the Americans free navigation of the waterway, which they had been promised in the Paris Treaty. The conflict was only resolved in 1795, when American Minister to Britain Thomas Pinckney negotiated a treaty that secured the border at 31 degrees and gave the Americans the right to use the port at New Orleans. Historian Ethan Grant argued in a 1997 article in the Gulf Coast Historical Review that the treaty was a critical part in the development and emergence of Manifest Destiny, because the territory it gained put Spain's control of the Floridas on unsecure footing, essentially dooming them to slow annexation. The United States was extremely interested in expanding its territory in the region. Most important was access to the Gulf of Mexico, which required either New Orleans or the Floridas. In an 1803 letter, Secretary of State James Madison laid out the relative value of the regions. The Floridas together, he said, was worth only a quarter of that of New Orleans, and East Florida only half of what West Florida was worth. The United States needed reliable access to the Gulf and freedom of the Mississippi, a fact that was made clear when Spain revoked the treaty allowing use of New Orleans in 1798, although it was restored in 1801. The situation was altered only slightly when Spain ceded all of Louisiana back to France in 1800. When Jefferson sent James Monroe and Robert Livingston to France in 1803, they went with the goal of buying New Orleans, but were surprised to find Napoleon's government offer the entirety of the Louisiana Territory. While the purchase included a huge and not entirely well-defined swath of the country, it did not actually include the entirety of the state of Louisiana. The exact wording of the transfer from Spain to France gave the territory that it had under the power of France when she ceded it to my royal crown. That didn't stop the United States from arguing that the most western portion, including Mobile, was actually included in the purchase. Still pursuing Mobile, Congress authorized $2 million to be used in an effort to acquire Mobile. For Jefferson and many other Americans, the idea of expansion across the continent was already looking preordained, although the term manifest destiny wouldn't be coined until 1845. The apparent serendipity of the Louisiana Purchase only strengthened American convictions that the land would eventually become theirs, leading to large numbers of settlers crossing the imaginary national lines on the map to stake their tents anywhere that seemed like it might eventually be annexed to the United States. Many of them land speculators who saw an opportunity for profit. West Florida was sparsely populated at the time. Its largest settlements, Baton Rouge in the west and Pensacola in the east, each had only around 1,000 people in 1810, although it was also home to around 45,000 Native Americans. Among the European settlers, especially near Baton Rouge, were an increasing number of Americans who had been streaming into the region for various reasons since the Revolution. When the governor of East Florida invited foreigners to move into the territory in the 1790s, Jefferson wrote Washington that he wished 100,000 of our inhabitants would accept the invitation. Maybe the means of delivering to us peaceably what otherwise may cost us a war. There were a variety of goals among the people of the region. Some wanted to return to England or France. Some wanted true independence, but the most important faction sought annexation by the United States. The region had long used its position at the nexus of empires to advance its own agenda, and the people there still hoped to come out of it on top. Spain saw the region as vital to protecting its remaining colonial interests in South and Central America, which would face enormous unrest in the coming years. In 1804, a group of American brothers named the Kemper's, who owned land in both the Mississippi Territory and West Florida, engaged in a series of raids with the aim of overthrowing the Spanish regime. The Kemper's had been in the region since 1799, but were forcibly removed in 1804 by the militia. They soon returned with a gang, stealing weapons and generally causing unrest. The Spanish responded by reinforcing their forts and declaring the gang enemies of the state. In August of 1804, the Kemper's returned and kidnapped local officials, carrying a white striped flag containing 2 stars in a blue field, with a proclamation of independence, which aimed to throw off the galling yoke of tyranny of the Spanish. The proclamation was supposedly written by Edmund Randolph, a hero of the American Revolution. The attempt quickly sputtered, however, and the Kemper's eventually fled to the Bahamas. Though the attempt was abortive and failed to secure support among local residents, it was just one in a series of cross-border incidents that continued to occupy the time of both Spanish and American authorities. Many of the incidents were caused by dissatisfied bandits and filibusters who dreamed of American Florida. In November 1810, a district judge blunted a planned attack on the Spanish city of Mobile. Issues with trade from Mobile continued to irritate Americans, and after the Louisiana Purchase, West Florida was nearly surrounded by American territory. Pro-American unrest was centered in Baton Rouge, in the Bayou Sara, or Feliciana district. The population there was almost entirely Anglo-American, beginning with Tories who had fled during the Revolution, as well as later American immigrants, deserters, and criminals who had come for Spain's liberal land policies. In 1808, King Ferdinand VII of Spain abdicated, and Napoleon installed his brother Joseph as king. This caused a crisis across the Spanish Empire, leading to revolts in Mexico, Caracas, and Buenos Aires. Numerous historians argue that the West Florida Rebellion is best understood as part of this wave of unrest, as local West Floridians were worried about what was best for their own interest and not driven by a sense of loyalty to any power. Governor Claiborne in New Orleans had advised the government for years on unsatisfactory conditions in West Florida. In 1810, he wrote that never before had a more heterogeneous mass of good and evil gathered in the same extent of territory. In 1807, a letter from gentlemen in New Orleans reported that the people of West Florida were ripe for violent measures, and that if the United States will not protect them, they will solicit the assistance of England. Jefferson's administration was exploring options for buying or seizing the territory. In August of 1808, Jefferson suggested seizing our own limits of Louisiana and the residue of the Floridas as reprisal for spoliations. Well, Spain was busy in the Peninsular War. In April 1810, Samuel Fulton, an adventurer and the adjutant general of the West Florida militia, sent President Madison a letter offering his services in a possible annexation. It seems it was Governor Claiborne who convinced Madison to hatch an underground effort at causing the region to revolt. The hope was that they could get West Floridians to request the intervention themselves. Nature has decreed the union of Florida with the United States, an order sent to New Orleans said, and an American agent was empowered to inform West Floridians that a revolt would be welcomed by the United States. By June 20th, Governor Holmes of Mississippi wrote that West Florida was in total anarchy. Holmes was told to have his militia ready and to be prepared to defend the interests of the United States. On July 1st, a meeting was held in the Feliciana district to try to establish a government with the assistance of the remaining Spanish officials. Later in July, a second convention of 16 was organized with the official goal of assisting the Spanish governor, but according to Holmes, the rebels were afraid to declare for independence just yet. A third convention was held on August 13th, and Holmes sent a personal agent to observe. The agent brought back a letter that said the convention saw the United States as a guardian and a mother, and that 2/3 of the inhabitants of this country complained that she has been treated with neglect. They offered to declare independence and requested amnesty for Tories and criminals in the region. The final convention was held on September 22nd. That was the day the situation finally boiled over, when the convention declared the Spanish governor unworthy of their confidence and ordered Philemon Thomas and their militia to capture the fort at Baton Rouge, Fort San Carlos. Early in the morning of the 23rd, West Florida forces stormed the fort, which only had about 50 defenders. In a sharp and bloody firefight, the militia seized the fort and captured Delasses, killing two. A new flag was unfurled, a single white star on a field of blue. Holmes mobilized the entire Mississippi Territory militia to protect the territory and to support the Florida conventionalists. It was only on September 28th that Holmes finally received a letter informing him of the government's operation with Claiborne. Madison got word of events, but hesitated. Congress wasn't in session, and he didn't believe that he had the constitutional authority to order the military without their permission. The United States had officially maintained that they had purchased the region in the Louisiana Purchase, but Madison still doubted his right to act. A Declaration of Independence was passed on September 26th, and on October 27th, without Congress in session, James Madison issued an official proclamation of annexation. Now it was only left to the U.S. to take possession. The legal framework for the annexation was more than a little shaky. Madison appealed to the Treaty of San Ildefonso, writing that the treaty transferred Louisiana with the same extent that it had in the hands of Spain, and that it had when France originally possessed it. However, that is in fact a misquote. Neither the treaty nor the Louisiana Purchase documents say originally, but instead say with the same extent that now has in the hands of Spain and that it had when France possessed it. Madison's defense, while providing rationale, was not supported in the treaty language. Meanwhile, the state of Florida, as it was officially titled, had been hard at work. They'd sent Philemon Thomas across their newly declared territory to consolidate it, written a constitution, and on November 7th elected a government, including Governor Fulwar Skipwith. Skipwith was a Revolutionary War veteran, a former U.S. consul general, and had been instrumental in the negotiations of the Louisiana Purchase. He was inaugurated on November 29th, where he laid out an ambitious plan in his inaugural address. A force was being assembled to assault Mobile, assisted by an irregular force that included the Kempers. There remained, however, a problem. The new government of West Florida wanted to negotiate its entrance into the Union, with promises regarding land titles and other issues. Claiborne was not interested in negotiations. The tiny republic had already been annexed, in his mind. They distributed the proclamation and gathered as many soldiers as they could. In early December, Holmes and Claiborne advanced into the territory. The government there was not pleased, but were mostly quickly convinced that given the political situation, the U.S. couldn't recognize the state of Florida's government. Skipwith, however, with a handful of others, retired to the fort at Baton Rouge, where he claimed he would surround the flagstaff and die in its defense. On December 7th, Claiborne entered St. Francisville, the capital of Florida, and appointed officers to make the region a country. Thus, Holmes wrote, West Florida willingly exchanged a system of government which peculiar circumstances had induced them to adopt for that of the United States. Skipwith quickly gave up his futile goal of fighting, and he and the handful of soldiers at Baton Rouge put up no resistance. On December 10th, the last Florida soldiers marched out of the fort and saluted the Lone Star flag one final time. Criticism abounded. Skipwith and others in Florida felt that they had been slighted, and the government just as vociferously denounced Skipwith in the National Intelligencer. Congress passed a resolution on January 15, 1811, to occupy the region, but declaring that the territory would remain subject to future negotiations with Spain. Briefly, in March of 1811, rebels again raised the flag of the Republic, forcing Claiborne to send troops to maintain his authority. During the War of 1812, Spain sided with the British, and American forces occupied the region further, up to Mobile and to the Perdido River. In 1912, historian Isaac Joslyn Cox criticized the West Florida actions as among the most indefensible in our diplomatic history, although he admits that the situation likely meant that Florida was in fact destined to become American. The French negotiator of the Louisiana Purchase called the U.S. argument doubtful and said it didn't accord with the spirit of justice the country was known for. Spain finally renounced any claim to West Florida in the 1819 Adams-Onis Treaty. Louisiana became a state in 1812, but for a while it didn't include the part of the state that used to be part of West Florida. That is that part above Lake Pontchartrain between the Mississippi River and the Pearl River, including the city of Baton Rouge. Because while Congress authorized Louisiana to expand its borders to include what is still sometimes called the Florida parishes, in April of 1812, the Louisiana legislature didn't approve of that expansion until August of 1812. The land between the Pearl and Perdido rivers, which was captured from Spain in the War of 1812, would be given to the new states of Alabama and Mississippi, giving both of them access to the Gulf. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community at Locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.